Do you want to make a blouse that looks like you just got it from Valentino for $1,200? I got you covered.
Hello, amazing people! Today I am going to show you how to make this blouse with a bow and poet sleeves. I will be using French seams and baby hem, which are the best seams for organza and semi-transparent silk materials. And it also makes the garments feel so much more expensive. However, it does take more time compared to regular seams. That's why I recommend this project for those who have a bit of experience and determination for a really high class result. I will be using a silk material that has a bit of stretch, but it's not mandatory. You can also use viscose or polyester, anything that feels very nice against your skin. I will also use a pattern which you can get in our Etsy or online store. The links are down in the description. A matching thread and elastic band which is 7 to 10 millimeters wide. Since today we are making this blouse with French seams, I will be using only the sewing machine straight stitch, so no worries if you don't have serger. Also, a special shout out to an iron, because it really makes the process of making perfect French seams so much easier. Now let's cut out all the details. This was such a tricky fabric to work with because it's so slippery and stretchy and moving around. That's why I used a lot of weights and I also pinned the pattern pieces on the fabric. Plus, it was impossible to draw straight lines on it. That's why I used a fabric marker and I put small dots to mark the dark lines. And this fabric was so transparent that I could easily mark the dart on the other side as well. And don't forget to cut the notches at the sleeves, armholes and the bow. Let's start by sewing the dart. My method of pinning the darts is to always start by pinning from the upper side, from the narrowest side, and then work downwards. After I have put the first pin in, I fold the dart on half and I pin the rest of the dart. But when it comes to sewing, I always sew from the widest part. And while we are here, let's pin the other dart as well. Since this fabric is so delicate, I will not backstitch. But if you have a thicker fabric, you can backstitch. To be sure that the seams are keeping together, I will tie knots by hand. Press the dart downwards. Now take the bias tape for a neckline and press it on half. Lay the bias tape's right side together with the front panel's wrong side and sew it around this keyhole neckline's part. Lightly press the bias tape around the neckline. Trim off the excessive part of the seam allowance and leave around 3 to 4 millimeters there. Now fold and press around 5 millimeters of the bias tape's other edge. Fold the bias tape over the seam you just made, in a way that it covers the seam, and make a stitch around 1 millimeter apart from the folded edge. Press the neckline. Don't worry if it looks wavy at the moment, just slowly try to even it out. Since we are using French seams, some things will go other way around. Lay the back panel wrong side together with the front panel wrong side. Pin the shoulder seams. And sew both shoulder seams 1 centimeter apart from the edge. Now press the seam towards one side, it doesn't matter to which one. Now trim off the excessive part of the seam allowance and leave around 3 to 4 millimeters of it. If you don't trust your gut feeling of measurements, then use a ruler and add some markings so you know where to cut. Flip the front panel so the right sides are facing each other. Use your fingers to bring the seam as close to the edge as possible and press. As you can see, now it looks very nice and sharp. In this way, it will be way much easier to make a very precise seam. And now sew both shoulder seams and stitch 5 millimeters apart from the edge. So this is how the seam should look like from the wrong side and from the right side. Press both shoulder seams towards the back panel. These seams take so much work, but I think we can see why it's totally worth it. And now let's do exactly the same steps for both side seams. Actually, normally I don't pin as much, I just sew right away, but this fabric was so wild that I felt so much safer to pin as much as I can. And if your fabric is even crazier than mine, feel free to hand stitch the seams before you sew. That way you will keep the fabric precisely together. Press the seams to one side. Trim off the excessive amount of the seam allowance and repeat it with the other side. Now lay the blouse panels with the right sides facing each other and press the seam in a way that it's very nice and sharp. Lay the blouse panels with the right sides together and sew both side seams. Stitch 5 millimeters apart from the edge. Now press both side seams. I started by pressing them flat because they were looking slightly uneven, and then I pressed them towards the back panel. Let's prepare the sleeves. I will mark the placement of the tunnel where the elastic band will go. Because this fabric is so specific, I will do markings against the hem. I simply put many dots. If your fabric is more stable, you can fold the paper pattern, put it on the sleeve detail and draw a line in according place. Lay the sleeve with the wrong sides facing and sew together the longest seam. Just in case, I will remind that stitch 1 centimeter apart from the edge. Press the seams and press them towards one side. Trim off the excessive part of the seam allowance and leave around 3 to 4 millimeters. And press again the seam nice and sharp. And remember to do the same steps with the other sleeve as well. Lay the sleeves with the right sides facing and sew the longest seam. If the seam is looking uneven, press it flat and then press it towards back. Since it is more convenient right now, let's hem the sleeve. I will be using a baby hem because it has this very delicate look. I will fold 1 cm apart from the edge and stitch around 2 to 3 mm apart from the folded edge. I took off the sewing machine's flatbed attachment so I could easier go around the hem. This is how the hem should look like. Now take very sharp scissors and cut along the seam you just made. Be careful not to actually cut in the stitch, and also don't make holes in the sleeve panel. Just cut off this one layer. And let's work with the other sleeve as well. Now fold the hem again and stitch it 2 to 3 mm apart from the edge. Press the hem for both sleeves. Take the tunnel detail for sleeves and press 1 cm apart from one edge. And do the step for other detail as well. Fold this detail on half with the right sides facing and sew together the shortest edge. And here as well, I am not backstitching, but I am making knots so the seam wouldn't unravel. Press the seam open. And a quick press to renew that folded edge. Now take the tunnel detail and put the sleeve inside it. Match the tunnel detail's right side with the sleeve's wrong side. Lay it by matching the markings and the side seams. Start by pinning the edge that hasn't been pressed before. Sew around 1 cm apart from the unfolded edge. Now mildly press this tunnel detail upwards. Don't forget to do these steps with the other sleeve as well. After that, lay the folded edge on the sleeve and top stitch 1 mm apart from the folded edge. Sew around, but leave a hole approximately 1 cm so we can later insert the elastic band. And repeat the same step with the other sleeve. Take the elastic band, wrap it around your wrist and decide what length feels the most comfortable for yourself. And remember to leave around 2 cm seam allowance. Cut the length you need and cut one more as well. Take a safety pin and pin it at one end of the elastic band. Now slide it inside the tunnel through the hole. By the way, don't lose the other end of the elastic band. You have to leave it outside. Take out the safety pin. Lay both ends of the elastic band on top of each other so it lays flat. If you can manage to get it under sewing machine's needle, you can use a zigzag stitch to sew it together. But for myself, I felt it's more convenient to simply hand stitch it together. Stretch the elastic band so it goes totally inside the sleeve tunnel, and also even out the gathering around it. After that, put it back on the sewing machine and close the hole you left for the elastic band. And remember to repeat these steps with the other sleeve. We're finally ready to sew in the sleeves. So we need to start by gathering the upper edge. You will need to make 2 stitches starting from one notch to another notch. Let's set the sewing machine stitch to number 4 or higher. Sew the first stitch around 5 to 7 mm apart from the edge. Leave long tails of the threads. And now make another stitch approximately 2 mm apart from the previous one. And make these 2 gathering stitches for the other sleeve as well. Take the blouse panel and turn it inside out, so the right side is outside and the wrong side is inside. Take the right side sleeve and make sure that it is with the wrong side outside. Put it inside the blouse so the wrong sides are facing each other. Firstly, match the sleeve seam with the blouse's side seam. Then match the top notch at the sleeve with the blouse's shoulder seam. And after that, match the armhole notches. Pull both threads from the gathering stitch. Pull as far so the length is matching the armhole length. Even the gathering out and pin. Remember that it's supposed to be more gathered at the top of the shoulder, next to the shoulder seam. And the lower it goes towards the armhole, the less gathered it becomes. Sew around 1 cm apart from the edge. If you need to, you can also smooth out the gathering during sewing. So this is how it should look like. I know it might seem weird that the raw edges are on the right side of the blouse, but at this point it is completely correct. Let's sew in the other sleeve as well. Remember to put it in a way that the wrong sides are facing each other. Now let's cut the excessive part of the seam. Since the armhole is curved, it will actually be easier to work with the seam later if you cut more of it than previously. I recommend to leave around 2 millimeters of the seam, but be very careful not to cut more, otherwise the seam might tear and it could really ruin the fabric and the blouse. So just take all the time you need and enjoy the process. Now flip the seam to the other side and press around the armhole so the seam is nice and flat. Repeat it with the other armhole. Sew around the armhole 5 millimeters apart from the edge. And of course do it with the other armhole as well. Lightly press around the armholes to make the seam smoother. Take the blouse and turn it with the right side outside. And take a look at the sleeves and check whether there aren't any loose ends of the threads or maybe some visible parts of the gathering stitch. Here I found a hanging thread and I simply cut it off. Also here the gathering stitch is coming out of the seam, so I used pliers and I simply pulled it out. After taking out the thread from the gathering stitch, there were a few very small holes left in the fabric. That's why I used the steam from the iron and those holes closed up very nicely. Let's start to work with the bow detail now. Lay both bow panels with the right sides facing each other and pin the center seam. Sew 15 millimeters apart from the edge. Press the seam towards one side. Now take your scissors and cut off 1/2 of the seam allowance only for the bottom layer of the seam. Fold the widest seam allowance side around the narrowest seam allowance and press. Top stitch 1 millimeter apart from the folded edge. This type of seam is called the flat felt seam, and it's a good option for this type of blouse because it still doesn't reveal raw edges and it's quite strong. I will give a quick press to smoothen it out. If your fabric is quite transparent, for example you are using chiffon or organza, then let's use French seams for the bow as well. Fold the both panels on half so the wrong sides are facing each other. Pin starting from the end of the bow to the notch that indicates the neckline. Sew 1 cm apart from the edge. Do the step with both ends. Since I won't be able to properly tie knots at the end of the stitch, I will leave the needle in the fabric, put up the presser foot and turn the fabric by 180 degrees and then stitch kind of backwards. This is another good backstitching method for delicate fabrics. I'm quickly pressing the seam to smoothen it out. It doesn't always happen this way, so if your seam is looking nice already, you don't need to press it. Cut off the loose ends of the threads and the excessive part of the seam allowance, but cut it off only to the neckline notch. Use some kind of a stick to turn it from the inside out. Try to bring the corners to the edge as much as you can. I will be using a larger pin and I will be sticking the seam towards the edge. Just be very careful not to ruin the fabric. When the corners are looking nicely, take the iron and press them. Also press around the rest of the edge. Sew 5 mm apart from the edge and stop exactly at the neckline notch. Remember to use that special backstitching method if you need to. Press to smoothen out the seam. After pressing, turn this detail from the inside out. Similarly to the previous time, bring the corners towards the edge and press. After you have pressed the edge with the seam, press the other edge as well so the bow detail is completely flat. Now let's work with the neck part. Take one layer of the seam allowance and fold 1.5 cm towards inside and then press. Lay together the blouse's right side with the bow's right side. Pin the bow's edge that you haven't yet pressed together with the blouse's neckline. Sew 1.5 centimeters apart from the edge. Press the seam towards the bow. I laid the blouse on the ironing board's edge because in this way it was easier to access the seam in a flat way. I am going to use the stitch in a ditch method, that's why I will be doing some hand stitching. I recommend to use a thread in different colors so it will be easier to find it and take it out later. Now take that part of the bow that you pressed before and lay it on the seam you made previously in a way that it covers the stitch and it's not visible. And pin. Fix the fabric in the place by using a hand stitch. Another easier option would have been to put the folded edge against the stitch you made previously. You can pin it and then top stitch 1 mm apart from the edge. In this case the seam would be more visible and that's why it's not considered as high quality as the stitch in a ditch method. But then again it would be much faster. Now work from the right side of the blouse and sew along the bow detail. Try to stitch as close as you can to the seam you made before, but don't stitch on the bow detail. For me, this isn't the easiest method to use, that's why I took quite some time to go through it, but I think it was totally worth it. Now take a look and make sure that you have sewn all the way through the inside part of the bow. I will be using the pliers again to take out the hand stitched threads. We are so close to the finish line already. For the blouse hem, I will be using a baby hem again. So fold 1 cm apart from the edge and sew around 2 to 3 mm apart from the edge. Take again your sharp scissors and trim off the seam allowance. Fold the seam allowance again and sew around 3 to 4 mm apart from the edge. Give the final press and you have finished. If this tutorial was helpful for you, please give us a like and subscribe to our channel for more sewing tutorials. Bye!